Hello. Thank you for viewing my presentation on my paper, Chains of Influence, Trade Networks, and Tariff Constraints. So the question driving this paper is, do trade networks that are large and dense always provide more flexibility? Traditionally, we think of large trade networks as you have many different partners, you have different sources of getting goods. That gives you more flexibility to trade or implement trade barriers because you might be able to get goods from someplace else. Whereas if we see trade dependency, that's usually where you're getting your goods from a specific good from only a few places, or a single place, and then you have a high trade dependency because you need that good and you need them to cooperate with you. So we think of this as large trade networks, dense trade networks, providing a lot of flexibility. But I question if that's always the case. And I wonder if a network analysis approach can help reveal instances where the actual structure of the network could possibly impose some constraints that we aren't capturing. Certainly, this is not a complete explanation of trade barriers. Other economic and political factors are going to go into them, but I am looking to see if there is something that is inherent in the structure of a network that might actually affect this trade behavior. Specifically for this paper, I'm going to look at using dyadic constraint to see if I can explain tariff behavior in a case study. The theory behind this is that economic interconnectedness around the globe has increased drastically over time. Most states have a pretty sizable trade network that is relatively dense. When we think of networks, and especially networks over time, they're pretty large. They have a lot of trading partners, and lots of people are trading with other people, even if only to a small degree. So there's a lot of connections there. We're also seeing much more increased norms of free trade, norms that discourage implementing trade barriers, working together, multilateralism. So these are things that are valued by states in trade partners, and that trade partners want to signal to other states that, hey, I'm a good trade partner, I do these things. They don't want to trade with someone who's going to be implementing a lot of trade barriers. Considering that, a large network also means a larger audience to see you implementing trade barriers and to respond to that. Trade agreements don't happen in a vacuum. Dyads are not independent of other dyads. Right? They are seeing what's happening between each other, especially if they're in the same network. If you are connected to a lot of other states that trade with these states, then people are paying attention to what's happening there because, hey, I trade with this person, I trade with these other states that trade with this person. There's a lot of visibility and learning there on what is this trade behavior of that state. And again, this is certainly not the full and complete story of trade barriers or how they're implemented, but I want to look at that structural element and see what it might have an impact on trade behavior. Put this in network terms, the more that our state of interest, our specific state that we're looking at their trade network, which we call the ego, increases its trade network, has it be more dense, the more that it will be limited in how it can implement trade barriers. The other trade partners in the network called alters, the other alters are able to have secondary paths to still get the goods because they're trading with another trade partner. And that may not be ideal, but that does mean there's another path to get the goods and services they were getting from that state. It also means that they are learning from, again, the trade barriers being implemented on one state tells the other states, oh, hey, this state implements these trade barriers. This state may not be a great state to trade with. So there's a sort of learning connection that goes on there. That behavior is signaled to the rest of the network. A trade partner, an alter that is very central in the network, that is connected to lots of other states, is going to be more visible in that network. If a state is looking at a partner state that trades with the ego, so you have two alters and it's looking at an alter that trades with the ego to learn about the ego's behavior, If that altar that's being watched is being watched by lots of other altars because it's connected to more altars, that's more altars it's essentially relaying that information to. So for the dyadic constraint measure, an altar with a high constraint is an altar that has a high number of connections to other altars in the ego's network. A visual representation, sort of a simplified example of this, is here. We have our ego at the center of our network. It's connected to several of these altars, and those altars are connected to each other. The number listed is the dyadic constraint value. And so we can see our green node, our green altar, that is connected only to the ego. It has no other connections to any other altars. It has the lowest dyadic constraint value. While our blue altar that is connected to the most other altars has the highest constraint value. So again, an altar that is connected to a lot of the other altars in that specific ego network has a high dyadic constraint value on that ego. The theory to why I feel this constraint value will also equal limitations on trade behavior is because, again, the states that trade with that altar, there's lots of other secondary routes to get to the ego and the goods and services it provides, and then primarily the idea of that altar is going to signal that behavior to lots of other altars. So our other 0.4s or other 0.09s are all watching our blue altar and seeing what the ego does to the blue altar if they're implementing these trade barriers. And so there's more people having visibility on that than anyone having visibility, for example, on the green altar, which no one is watching because they don't trade with them. So to explore this, I'm going to use a case study of China in 1997. China's a rising economic power, so we're definitely seeing a growing and expanding trade network. They have economic concerns to try to increase that network, keep fueling their domestic economic growth. So a large network with a lot of partners. There's also a lot of discussion about China, both then and now, as a challenger state, as having this great economic influence, and what's going to happen as it gains more influence. Is that influence exploitative in any way? Lots of question, lots of discussion about that. 1997 is also prior to WTO membership, which the WTO, of course, has rules about imposing tariffs in other states. So that would provide a sort of exogenous restriction, limitation on tariff behavior that by using 1997, I can avoid that. Again, I'm using network regression analysis here, and it's important to use a network approach because we need to not treat these dyads as independent. As I said before, these trade agreements are not happening in a vacuum. This trade behavior, tariff behavior, none of this is happening in a vacuum. These states see what's happening with other states. Standard regressions treat the dyads as independent observations. Network regression allows us to account for the full network, full relationship between all the parts of the network, no longer treating those dyads as independent, which of course in international trade we know that they're not. We know they're watching and learning from each other. My dependent variable is tariff behavior as the average effectively applied tariffs. My explanatory variable is dyadic constraint of that altar on the ego, and then I have standard trade controls, the volume, the distance, a shared border, and cultural similarity. This network is very large. It's 151 states, so the better portion of the world, with 7,069 trade ties between those nodes. I hypothesize first that the level of dyadic constraint on China by a trade partner will be statistically significant for the average levels of tariffs imposed on that partner by China. So the partner's dyadic constraint will be statistically significant for predicting the level of tariffs that China puts on that partner. And then my second hypothesis, following my theory, is that that level of dyadic constraint is going to be an inverse relationship with the level of tariffs. meaning that the higher the constraint, the less tariffs will be imposed on that node. Again, because you don't want to signal to a node that has connection to lots of other alters that you're going to impose these trade barriers, as that might make the other alters more hesitant to trade with you. My results do show significance for constraint, but not in the direction that I was hoping. So you can see here constraint is significant, as are my controls, but it is a positive value where I was looking for that negative relationship. So that provides support for my first hypothesis. We can view dyadic constraint as a way to predict tariff behavior. It is statistically significant. However, it does not support the relationship that I was expecting, that I was looking for. It is, in fact, a positive relationship. Um, but again, this does support the use of dyadic constraint in studying trade behavior, and in particular, tariff and trade barrier behavior. This may provide support for those existing theories on how a larger trade network does in fact provide more flexibility, but it could be that I'm missing a signaling mechanism here. It may be that China is in fact trying to signal that you need to get in line, follow the trade that we're looking for, or else we're going to impose these tariffs. So I think there's still something to be explored there with these high constraint alters as being nodes that relay information that are signaling to other nodes. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for listening.